Hello and welcome to Vibrant Living Diaries, the podcast where we unlock the secrets of how you can renew your inner vitality and relearn what it means to live a life with energy and purpose. I'm your host, Danielle Grobman, and I'm proudly here with the International Wellness Alliance. This alliance is home to experts across the world whose specialties allow us to cover the entire spectrum of health and wellness, and bring that knowledge to you right here on this platform. Just as a disclaimer, the stances our guests take on this podcast and the topics we cover are not representative of our individual perspectives. If you're planning on making any lifestyle and/or health changes based on what we cover here, please consult your main medical wellness practitioner to find the best next steps for you to take on your wellness journey. Today we have with us Jenetta Barry, a distinguished expert in the field of emotional intelligence and communication. With a past darkened by the death of her 16-year-old daughter, Jennifer, and the suicidal thoughts that accompanied her during this harsh time, Jenetta has dedicated her life to equipping individuals with the skills necessary for growth, clear communication, and the tools to help navigate the complexities of emotions and relationships. Jenetta works with individuals and businesses alike to help them identify the root cause of miscommunication and help them to clearly and effectively express themselves, to actively listen, identify the signs, and work to transform their neural pathways. If you yourself or anyone you know is struggling with issues of this nature, we want you to know here and now that you are seen, you are not alone, and we hope this episode can give you the confidence to take the first step into recovery. So without further introduction needed, Jenetta, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time.
Such an honor and pleasure, and thank you for this space so that we can share with others and possibly make a difference.
I think the best way to kickstart this podcast is by diving into, I guess we can call it the elephant in the room, and describing your experience that we chat about before, about being a mother and witnessing this kind of struggle that you saw when it came to Jenny and her own mental health journey. Could you kind of describe what that did to you in terms of your work and how it progressed moving forward?
So my work at that time had progressed from being a motivational speaker and trainer for sales forces, and it felt out of integrity because I wasn't giving real long sustaining life skills to those people. And so I went on to work on my intuition, and I noticed after a while that people were still relying on my intuition as being more effective than theirs. And I felt out of integrity again because we're all intuitive. It's not a closed society. And at the time that I was questioning that is when I had this greatest ordeal with losing Jenny to suicide. So yes, it did affect my work. In some ways, I was forced to carry on with my work, but I, at the same time, could feel that the great missing inside me wasn't being filled by my work. So I was feeling even more out of integrity. It was one thing being able to help others with how life is generally if you haven't had a loss like I had. So I was able to carry on doing that because I was used to it, but it just didn't feel right. So it affected my work greatly. Yeah. The more it was affecting my work, the more I felt powerless.
I'm sure that the pain that you felt when you lost your daughter, I believe you said she was 16?
Yeah, she just turned 16 2 weeks before she died.
That must have been unimaginable, to put it lightly, to lose your daughter. For any mother who is maybe dealing with that kind of stress and having to navigate these new emotions of what do I do now? How do I move on from this? What are some of the coping mechanisms that you found that helped you along this journey that maybe you could impart to some other women and fathers that are maybe having to now battle this?
There were many that I had to start observing before I realized I was using them. One of the things when you lose a child the way I lost her, we'd had a journey already of 2 years before Jenny died, of her in and out of rehab. And she was a difficult child from the get-go. So when I found Jenny in her shower, I remember feeling two completely opposing, conflicting feelings. And that is one of the reasons I wasn't coping, and where a lot of people in grief don't cope. It's the hidden guilt and shame of grief that keeps us locked in our grief. And I only realized that with time as I started researching just how much that can lock us and did lock me. So what happened was the part of me as a mother wanted, it was horrific to see her the way she was and wanted me to revive her. And the other part of me was completely relieved that she was gone. It was like, oh my goodness, she can no longer hurt herself. It had been one of my great concerns that she would hurt herself and become immobilized for the rest of her living life. And the other was that she was no longer my responsibility, that sense of not having that responsibility for the rest of my and her life. It was such a relief. It was like, oh my goodness, I haven't got this to deal with for forever. And at the same time, I was calling for people to try and revive her. Even 2-3 hours after she died, I was begging the doctor for any way we could bring her back. So that conflict, it's such a contradiction internally, can cause a lot of guilt and shame as a parent. In actual fact, my study has showed that most loss of a loved one or somebody that matters in your life comprises that. There's a part of you that's relieved, and there's a part of you that just can't cope with it. And that conflict is what comprises a lot of guilt. And only with time did I start realizing, oh my gosh, this is what I was having to deal with and why I was feeling so mindless for a while, trying to deal with that feeling inadequate as a parent for being relieved.
I want to touch on that kind of feeling of relief because for any parent, I mean, there's a saying that my mom says that, the children is the light of my life. It's like this great joy, this great pride and pridefulness to be a mother to a daughter, to be a mother to a son, a mother just in general. When you said that you felt relief that you no longer had to deal with this, could you describe what this is?
The constant conflict going on from your child when they're in a place of total turmoil within themselves. So I was finding that I would try and help Jenny in one way or set parameters in another way. And what might work one time would misfire another time. So there was no sure way of dealing with Jenny. There was always this tension and uncertainty that she was being really serious about leaving the planet and that she might actually succeed. So that was always there. So we ended up treading on eggshells a lot of the time to make sure that anything we did didn't push her to that edge. So that's when what I call a lot of manipulation comes in, because that person's feeling powerless generally. And then that starts making them feel it's not actually safer, but it makes them feel safer and that they're in more control. Meanwhile, the more she was doing without me putting parameters into place, the more she was putting herself and us as a family at risk. So really conflicting time.
It sounds it. And it sounds like for any child who is going through those kind of suicidal tendencies, they maybe don't understand how it is affecting those around them because they are so in their heads about what they are feeling and what they're experiencing that they don't really understand how it's manifesting for the rest of the family. When we talked last, you were talking about how you were feeling and how this kind of made a shift or a divide within the family. For siblings that are dealing with this kind of stress when it comes with what is my sister going to do? What might my brother do? How did you notice it affecting your other kids? And what did you do as a mother to kind of help them through these? Because I'm sure it wasn't something that you could keep from them. I mean, I'm sure the siblings talked and it was obvious what she was going through.
It was her fourth suicide attempt, so they were all very obvious about what she was going through. And to be honest, because I was missing the skills I now have, especially communication skills, and I was missing the ability to help Jenny get those communication and coping skills as well, we all muddled along. There was no university degree, there was no textbook. We muddled along, and one of the biggest things was that the shame and guilt of what Jenny was going through made her say, here's an example. You don't tell anybody what's happening because I'll kill myself. Nobody must know. So I have my very closest friend in Spain, which is where you're at the moment. We grew up together, and she was Jenny's godmother. She'd been my bridesmaid. I wasn't even able to talk to her. So for we as a family, we were muffled. We weren't able to go and safely talk to anybody. I just found that conventional therapy didn't help. All I was doing was spewing out how I was feeling, and often I was leaving feeling worse than when I got there. So that wasn't helping, and I really needed the people around me to be able to support me and know what we were going through. And I couldn't do that. We had to pretend everything was okay. That was huge because all of us as a family were muddling along without the skills and the communication skills to deal with it.
I want to ask about when you were going through these feelings and after it happened. You mentioned that there was a time that you were just mindlessly walking, and you kind of just mindlessly walked into the middle of the street, and you didn't really care if a car hit you or not. You were just not present. Could you maybe share what that experience did to you in terms of how you were able to cope moving forward from this? Because for any parent losing a child, it is a great pain, and it's something that you can't just wake up in the morning and, oh, I'm fine, I'm all right. Like it sticks with you. There's a lasting memory, either the sight of it or just the feeling of, I'm no longer going to have my child with me.
And also the failure as a parent. That was also what I was dealing with. After all, she did this after she and I had an argument. There's a lot of accountability as a parent that one takes on, which often is over the top. It's not reasonable. It's unreasonable accountability. And as much as I was accountable, I was also not accountable because I didn't have the coping skills. And at the end of the day, Jenny chose. She took a choice, and that she's her own person. So I was battling with that as well. I was walking along a street. It was actually 9 months after Jenny died. And I remember thinking afterwards, so much happened at that ninth month, almost like it took 9 months to form her when she was a baby, and 9 months to process, to get somewhere, to unform her in the form she'd been in. And I was walking really mindlessly along the road, wishing I wasn't on the planet. I couldn't see a way of moving forward. It felt like I was serving a lifetime emotional prison sentence, and that I was in this deep, dark pit, which is where a lot of people suffering from overwhelm and depression feel. It feels like you're in this big black hole that you can't get out of. And I just couldn't imagine spending the rest of my life till my 80s or 90s, because my parents were in their 90s when they died, like this. It was inconceivable and overwhelming. And so I was walking mindlessly going, what am I doing here? And what's my purpose anymore? And I knew I had to cross the road. So I mindlessly stepped off the pavement into the oncoming traffic on the one side of the road, and amazingly didn't get hit, but part of me didn't really mind if I did. And I got halfway across, waiting there for a split second before carrying on, going, this voice, my voice, started saying to me, Jenetta, you've forgotten you've still got choice. You've labeled yourself as the label. The only label is the mother whose daughter killed herself after an argument. And that's who you're now defining yourself as only being. but it's one label of a billion. And you've chosen it to be the truth. And I thought about this conversation, as we all do. We all talk to ourselves and reason. As I carried on, still mindlessly, on the other side of the road through the traffic going the other way. And I got to the other side again, amazingly safely. And I stepped off the road onto the pavement, and then realized that I'd had what I call my crossing over moment, that I'd crossed over into a new way of looking at myself. I'd crossed safely over the road. And in terms of not crossing over into another form of being, if I had been killed, I'd had a profound crossing over moment. And as I carried on walking, I went, the only way you're going to get past this label that feels like the truth is to start researching and studying for effective, really accurate ways that can get you through this, because many other modalities I tried were helpful, but there was always a missing. So that was the missing that was holding me back, was like, there's no answer. And in that moment of getting over onto the pavement, I knew that I would have to find accurate ways to get through this.
In terms of finding those accurate ways, I'm sure that shaped you in terms of the profession that you chose moving forward. And I wanted to touch on that because you started by saying that you felt out of integrity. And for many people, when they either take a job or if they do have a job, they don't really take that into consideration, for lack of better words. They're either in it because they felt pressured to do it or it pays the bills. Like their heart isn't fully into it. But you're so adamant about walking the talk and making sure that if you're going to speak on something, you have the integrity within yourself to say, I felt this, I understand this, I know what I'm talking about, and therefore I am basically an authority figure on this subject, and I can talk about this. Can you share those strategies that you used after that epiphany that kind of helped you when it comes to helping other people through dark times, even if they didn't lose a child, if they're just depressed, if they're overwhelmed, if they're feeling this kind of burnout or in this emotional black hole?
Yeah, I started researching and studying more scientifically rather than hit and miss or just spiritually or both. Because spiritually is amazing, but there is a lot of trial and error on the spiritual side. So I knew that it was about finding accurate ways on a more scientific level. That's when I started studying what I call the yin and yang of science, because we're in a world of duality. And when you look at duality, that is powered by cycles. Our whole world is cycles. The noise coming out my mouth right now is decibels of cycles. And the electricity is electricity is a great example, because cycles to operate require equal amount of negative and positive charge in it. And yet we're in a society that advocates that you've got to eliminate negative thought, word, and deed. And to be successful and healthy and wealthy and wise, you concentrate on being positive. And that was where the dissension was happening within me, because I knew I couldn't be positive with so much negative having happened around me, that something was valuable in that negativity and that it needed to be honored. If we try and take negative charge out of an electricity cycle, it becomes disempowered. And yes, we're told that our thoughts and emotions must only be positive for us to succeed. So that was the missing. And when I was able to start putting together the skills and the techniques that enabled me to see the equal amount of positive in the negative that was happening, as much as the equal amount of negative in the positive that was happening, that creates a really manageable cycle. And that's what they did with electricity. Before they learned how to harness it, it was extreme and very dangerous. And when they learned how to harness electricity so that it was in manageability, so positive and negative, were complementing each other at the same time as opposing, like two magnets pulling towards each other. That's what I started studying in our consciousness, our conscious consciousness and our unconscious consciousness. And it was liberating to be able to bring both sides of who I am. There are nearly 5,000 human traits listed in the dictionary, and they're positive and negative. So when you start honoring the negative side of yourself, as much as understanding the way that it doesn't serve you on your positive side, so you can see, this is how my positive works, this is how it doesn't, and this is how my negative doesn't work, but this is how it does. And when that happens, it's like taking those two magnets that are polarizing, are bipolarizing our thoughts and feelings and reversing them. When you do that, you create what we call in science a photon in your consciousness. And photon in Greek is phos. It means light. It means you lighten up, you become enlightened. And it creates a photon. I watch and feel my clients going as the thing that was consuming them becomes manageable, instead of being dangerously zapping like electricity in its extreme. You can then bring it into center, and the distracting thoughts and feelings peel away as you become very clear, centered, and focused about that particular thing or person or happening or about yourself. And instead of feeling guilty and ashamed for not meeting the unrealistic high standards you may have set yourself on either the positive or the negative, because there's a lot of people who are addicted to negativity and a lot of people who are addicted to positivity. And a lot of them go backwards and forwards and wonder why their lives are roller coastering. But when you reverse the polarities and create a photon in your consciousness, you start feeling a sense of acceptance and grace and unconditional love in a nanosecond about that particular thing you were most charged up about. That is what I help people to start learning, those skills to reverse the polarity about whatever it is they're most charged up about. It's magical in its scientific ability.
It also sounds quite heavy. And I want to ask, just to play devil's advocate, because I am really fascinated with this idea of finding the positive and the negative and understanding how they complement each other using this yin and yang kind of analogy. Let's say someone is going through these really hard times. Maybe they're suicidal, they're depressed, they're overwhelmed, they're experiencing overwhelming negative, and they feel like, I've just had too much negative in my life. It is so hard and it is so overbearing that I don't know how I can handle it. When you meet with those people in your work or in your personal, professional life, whatever setting you meet these people in, how can you get them to understand, even if you've gone through divorce, even if you've gone through death, even if you've gone through all of these negative things, how can they rewrite that narrative in their mind to make them see the positive, even if they are just so down in the dirt, for lack of better words? They don't see the light.
Well, there's two things here that are very separate to that. The one is that when you're writing something in your mind, it means you've marginalized how you're feeling because you're in your logic. And I don't know, I'm sure a lot of people will be sitting here, I'm not saying everybody, but a lot of people will be sitting here listening today going, nodding when I give this example. You're consumed by a problem that seems overwhelming. And during the day, what I call the male logic kicks in and you're going, okay, well, I'm going to take this action and I'm going to speak to this person or these people, and then I'll do this, and then I'll write that, and then I'll think this way, and you get it all into a logical order that makes you feel relatively safe and focused. Then you go to bed that night, and at 3:00 in the morning, your emotions wake you up going, and they don't agree with that plan. it doesn't feel at all safe to our emotions. It's because our emotions are not being listened to. Our logic is controlling and not bringing in how we're feeling. So the very fact that you said, the thought process in my mind means that only one part of you is being listened to and understood and being given the skills to balance out. So that's the first thing. Secondly, this process isn't for everybody. I always say there are two types of clients that I have. There's the one that's comfortable being uncomfortable, and then there's the one that's uncomfortable being uncomfortable. And that second one is ready to work the process because they're sick and tired of feeling this deep, deep, dark sense of nothing. They can't take another minute of it, not one more minute. And they're ready to roll up their sleeves and work the most amazing magic on their negative side, because initially there's so much judgment towards it. And as they start answering the questions that they've never been used to being even asked, let alone answer, they're prepared to go through the pain barrier, which feels like a pain barrier at first. But the moment they have the breakthrough, often they'll say to me, "Oh, I get it. Oh my gosh, I get it. I never thought about it that way." And then they stop and they say, "So why was that question so difficult to answer? Because now it's so easy to answer now that I've answered it." And I've noticed with time that more and more people are being attracted to the epiphany process, where answering these questions are getting easier and easier. I think consciousness is shifting with time. And whereas 20 years ago, when I first started this, 18 years, 17 years ago, when I first started this process, it was a lot of hard work for people to change from one-sided reality. We get stuck, this is the real story on the positive side, or this is the real story, and it's one-sided reality. When you have a photon moment or an epiphany moment, you go into actuality. And my clients liken it, they get stuck in seeing things in only one way, either side of the continuum. But when you're in actuality after an epiphany moment, it feels like you're able to take a step back like Michelangelo, and instead of the foot that's being painted, you see the big picture, and it's like, that's what's actually happening. That's so liberating. You're not stuck on a foot that looks like paint, doesn't even look like a foot. And you step back and they go, "Oh my word, this is amazing." And that's what happens. So the person who's comfortable being uncomfortable, it means that in the balance of things, something in their uncomfortableness is serving them more than going through the barrier to be able to liberate themselves. So an example would be, let's say I'm still living at home and I'm an adult child, and my one remaining parent dies. And that pain, I don't really want to feel that pain, but with it has come the most incredible support from the community. And with it has come a new lifestyle that keeps me enabled to them. Am I going to want to let go of that when it's easier to stay in my pain and be enabled than to go through the pain barrier? Because I call this the same as going to physical gym. It's mental and emotional gym. So you've got to want to show up at gym every day and work through the pain barriers like we do physically when we exercise. And if it's comfortable to not show up at gym, you're going to stay being comfortable being uncomfortable. So I can't help that person. It's more valuable to stay enabled than it is to have a liberated life. And it can also, it sounds very crass, but it is more valuable. But they think it'll be more dangerous letting go of it, because then they'll be alone and destitute or not loved anymore, because that's the foot of the painting they're only seeing. But when they have the courage or the point where they go, I can't, excuse me, take another fucking minute of feeling like this, they're ready for the epiphany process, because it's not an option. That's where I was when I crossed that road, going, I can't do this. I can't live a life of hell on earth anymore. And I'm prepared to roll up my sleeves and find ways to get through this. And that's how it works.
The way that you talk about this, it almost reminds me of that rock bottom moment without calling it rock bottom. In your experience, when it comes with these people finally having that, I can't take this anymore kind of emotion, do you notice there's one or a pattern of things in particular that lead them to that rock bottom? Or is it just it happens after enough time? Because I know that for me, for example, I held on to a lot of shame and guilt when my father died, because he died shortly after we had an argument, for lack of better words. I was 13. I just learned what curse words were, and I cursed him out, and he had a stress-induced heart attack, and I just listened to that flat line. And for so many years, I was just like, I killed someone. Like, I didn't know how to process this. And it took hitting rock bottom 4 years later to understand, okay, I need to actually deal with this properly. I need to deal with this healthy. But it was something that I couldn't foreshadow. I couldn't know that I would ever hit this rock bottom. It just snuck up on me one day. Is there any way we can expedite this? Or is it just something that it just comes when it comes?
I believe it comes when it comes. The person's got to be ready for this. And a lot of what possibly held you back is the judgment. Now, you've judged yourself that you killed, in inverted commas, your dad. So that judgment passes on, obviously, which isn't true. You go, obviously, everybody else is judging me for having done that. So if I move on, I'm going to lose the love of those people, because what loving daughter moves on saying it's okay after I, inverted commas, killed my dad? And that's what held you in that space until it got to a point where it just comes too much. It becomes so overwhelming. It doesn't matter what other people think, say, or do. You've got to do something about it. And then you start seeing that they weren't necessarily judging you that way. It was your perception, because we're in one-sided perception, limited perception.
Witnessing that crossing over when someone is in that limited, and then they have this awareness, and then they start to grow. Witnessing that, barrier breaking moment when it comes to the different people that you've worked with, that also must feel incredibly rewarding. Not only just being able to understand what they're going through and being like, okay, I got it, but actually seeing it happen on their face. Maybe they light up, maybe they start taking different actions in life. It manifests in a bunch of different ways. But from those cases, what kind of commonalities do you witness for people that begin to successfully navigate life after?
Yeah, it's the same for all of them. They start learning where their truth and their light is. And I've watched people starting to work their life purposes spontaneously. One of the things with the epiphany process is that it carries on working in the unconscious consciousness. Those questions carry on. And that's very liberating. So they start seeing things in the true light, in the truth and the light. And so it makes it easier for them to start speaking authentically, really speaking their truth, not from a place of judgment or fear, but it's their truth. And the other people may not agree with what they're saying and might even turn into hissy goblins going, yeah, I don't agree with you. But because you're speaking your truth from your heart, not from a place of fear and judgment, eventually one of two things will happen. That person will either go away and go, what a waste of space, and they're on their own journey, Or they'll go, actually, I understand what they're saying. And they start seeing the same part of that light, and new conversations start beginning. And even after one session, I've watched people come back to me in the second session saying things like, I've just had a conversation with great Uncle Harry, who I loathe. If I said 2 words to him in my whole lifetime, it's a lot. And we had a half an hour conversation where I was able to speak my truth from my heart without fear of judgment, without me judging him. And his response before we even started that conversation was different, because I had shifted. Before we even got together, he had shifted in his response to me. It's very enlightening. So that's what starts happening after even one session. If you look at the Epiphany testimonial videos and testimonials, a lot of them will say, just after one session, my whole life shifted and I hadn't dealt with all my issues, just one.
You mentioned that in the beginning, when we first initially started this call, that after this call, you're having another meeting for World Jenny Day. And I think this is a good time to ask you a little bit more about that, because in your personal work, you help people in transforming their lives, and you carry on the legacy with your daughter in this day. So what does World Jenny Day look like for people that maybe don't even know her or have never heard her story? What can they take away from this, and what does it stand for?
Well, World Jenny's Day came about because some years after she passed, we realized she'd actually died on World Mental Health Day, the 10th of October, and we knew that that correlation was very valuable in changing conversations around depression and suicide and normalizing them. And one of the things that I've noticed is that the epiphany process aside, we are creatures that have been created by the Creator. We're part of creation. And when we step into our innate creativity, our innate wisdom through creativity, it is the most natural process to balancing ourselves out. And unfortunately, our creative side has been marginalized a lot of the time by our schooling system, who feel that academics and sport are more important, and it's lovely to indulge in the school play or the poem you've written or the song that you might be singing. It's kind of like, oh, that's cute. And yet it's the other way around. So World Jenny's Day is an international day where during the year we use performing arts and the arts to normalize conversations around depression and suicide through workshops, through whatever, different ways to do it, different modalities through the arts to help people do that. And then on the day itself, we use it as a celebration of mental health wellness. And people, performers and artists from all around the world celebrate that throughout the day on the 10th of October by performing. And we even had a gala last year in London, in central London, to celebrate that, and also as a fundraiser. So it's a really liberating way of being able to incorporate the Epiphany process, because World Jenny's Day is the Epiphany process's charity, and it's a registered charity in the UK. So being able to incorporate the Epiphany process and also be able to use performing arts and arts to give the skills and to soften the conversations, to provide the skills and soften the conversations around what can be a contentious subject.
And I think that is our time for today, but I wanted to wrap up by asking if you could leave with just one lasting bit of advice, or just something that you've seen throughout everything we've talked about today. I don't even want to limit it to one subject, But what would be something that you could say to either people navigating these tough times, parents navigating these tough times, family, friends, anyone that is either witnessing or personally experiencing all of this overwhelming negative, and what to do next with all of this?
For me, what I've noticed in helping people over these years is to understand two things. One is that there is always an answer in the darkest hour. It's just, you're just blocked, blinded, and distorted from seeing it. And then the other thing is to know that when you're in that darkest hour, the answer is at its closest. It feels like it's at its furthest. There's the yin yang, but it's actually at its closest. And if you can find the skills and tools to break through at that darkest hour, it's always there. It's omnipresent. It's just hidden from you in your perception. It's there. It's present, waiting for you to break through and see that bigger picture. There's always an answer.
Thank you. This has been absolutely wonderful. But thank you so much for your insight and for taking the time to share all of these very personal, very hard things that you've had to battle in your life.
Danny, as I said at the beginning, it's an honor and pleasure to share this with you. And just to salute you for the work you're doing with this podcasting. It's going and is making a huge difference. And yeah, I'd like to honor and salute you too.
Thank you. And that wraps up today's episode of Vibrant Living Diaries. It has been an absolute pleasure having you with us. A huge thank you to our guests for sharing your expertise and to the International Wellness Alliance for making this possible. Remember, the insights and stories we've shared today are steps towards embracing a life of holistic fulfillment. We hope you've been inspired to take the next step forward in your own wellness journey. As always, we're eager to hear your thoughts and experiences. Connect with us on our social media platforms and feel free to share how you're integrating the knowledge gained here into your daily life. Your journey is important to us, and we look forward to growing together. I'm Danielle Grobman and can't wait to continue this journey with you in our next episode. Until then, keep exploring, stay curious, and embrace the vibrant life you deserve. Speak soon.